Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. We have a very special guest today. We have Mr. Michael Critelli, who is the retired CEO of Pitney Bowes. For people who may not know who Pitney Bowes is, they are a global shipping and mailing company providing technology, logistics, and financial services to more than 90% of all the Fortune 500 companies. So it's a huge corporation that Michael was the former CEO of. And the reason we have Michael today with us is he is one of the leaders of sustainability way back when no one was even thinking about sustainability. So Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Wendy. A privilege to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. When you and I first corresponded, I found you on LinkedIn. I loved your posts about sustainability and the environment, transportation, healthcare, well-being, social justice, everything. But one of the first things you did at Pitney was you reduced their pollution. And most companies back in the 80s weren't thinking about that yet. So what led you to say, I want to reduce the output of pollution, go to zero waste?
Well, the Community Right to Know Act was a compliance requirement, and we had industrial facilities that were adjacent to low-income residential areas. And my safety and environment function reported directly to me. And the head of safety and environment said, let's take this lemon, which is the Community Right to Know Act, and turn it into lemonade by becoming a zero discharge company and promote the fact that we are a zero discharge company in our operations. And we are a great citizen to the adjacent residential community. So that's how we got started. And we did it in about 5 years.
Oh, that's gigantic. That is huge progress.
Yeah, I had the support of our board of directors, and they pulled the CEO along at the time and the manufacturing people. And there was a lot of innovation that enabled that.
And most people they don't connect the dots, or what I call the chain reaction. Meaning when corporations will discharge waste or pollute, it's usually in a low-income area. It's usually where people end up living that can't afford to live in better places. So that's a social injustice. When we talk about social justice, it's everyone has the right to live somewhere pleasant, nice, that won't kill you. You initiated that, you started that, but you grew Pitney to do way more than that. I mean, you reduced your water usage, your energy usage, repurposing things. I mean, what hit you like when you said, I want to do this? When no one else was even thinking about it, what is it about you that said we are going to change?
Well, first of all, Pitney Bowes had a culture of health and well-being for decades. And this seemed like a natural extension of that culture. For air emissions, we had a lot of people who had respiratory ailments. And we were in an area that was one level better, but not great, compared to smog. And at that time, it's called an ozone non-attainment area. Connecticut was a severe ozone non-attainment area. And all I was thinking about was, let's make the air cleaner by reducing traffic congestion, getting more people out of single occupant vehicles, shortening commutes, and improving human health. Now, today, we would also look at the benefit in reduced CO2 emissions. But at that time, there were multiple other reasons we should be doing that. And the economic payback in terms of being an area in which people wanted to live and work was actually quite compelling. But other people may not have been looking at it that way. I just, in talking to my team, that's the way that the Pitney Bowes culture looked at it.
Now, a quick question for you. So obviously, one of the bigger issues that we always talk about is the cost of doing anything environmental. There's always a huge number involved. You were doing it at a time where the technology wasn't really there. It wasn't at the forefront. So how expensive was it? Not that you can give us exact numbers, but also what pushback did you get from it because you were at such a forefront?
Well, there are two different questions. When we were talking about going zero discharge, that was an easier one because we could show savings on water, savings on electricity, savings on waste disposal, savings on waste generation. We went from a spray paint process to a powdered paint process, and we saved a lot of water waste and chemical paint waste. When you're talking about respiratory illnesses, and There's been much more recently a study that Rand Corporation, and I'm an advisor to them, Rand Healthcare, did. How much do people value getting 10 to 20 minutes reduction in their commute? And the answer is more than you would realize. And it's a soft benefit, but if we can take 200 cars an hour off the road, the average speed of traffic goes up. The emissions go down because cars are at 45 miles an hour instead of 25 miles an hour, and commuting times go down. So if you assign economic benefits to those three things, you have to make some conceptual leaps, but they're credible. They're not pie in the sky kinds of leaps, and people feel them.
It's so funny that you talk about that, because I think what we look at, or I think what a lot of people look at, is the initial upfront cost of what it's going to be versus the end result of saying, if we invest a little bit now, we can exponentially save or do this much good at the end versus, so it's kind of like we look at it reverse, but it's going to cost too much now, or it's going to be too hard. So I think that's kind of an interesting way. I love that you approached it from that angle.
Yeah, I'll give you an example down here in Florida. I'm the president of my condominium association, and we're going to upgrade to all LED lighting with motion sensors and timers. My predecessor looked at this 5 years ago, and he thought the payback was 4 years, and that was too long. I probably still would have done it. But with the reduced cost of LED, particularly with the Chinese entering this market, the payback now is less than 2 years. And it's a no-brainer to do that. So we're going to significantly reduce our energy our energy costs of electricity. We're going to reduce the work that our manager has in terms of replacing light bulbs. Instead of once a year, maybe it'll be once every 10 years. Yeah. And we're going to produce a better quality of lighting. So and we did that at Pitney Bowes. We looked at energy costs. And there's one other point I would make. A lot of the cost did not redound to the benefit of our employees, our customers, our investors, or the community. They were outside vendors. I didn't need to make United Illuminating or Northeast Utilities richer. I wanted to put the money in the pockets of our stakeholders. And that's another point that we have to make. Who's benefiting from today's as-is situation? And it's typically a vendor, not one of our stakeholders.
It's so funny. It's like you just kind of look at the short-term investment and the long-term gain. It's really kind of just makes sense. It just seems like it's economics 101, but that's just my opinion.
Some people prefer having that quick payout, but one of the things, Michael, what you brought up was transportation. Yeah. And, I make no secret, I love trains, I love rail. And you actually were commuting from Manhattan to Connecticut, and you encouraged others. Would you mind explaining to people how you did that?
Well, I was asked to do a community service activity. I was on the train, 45 minutes to an hour every day, each way. And through a train strike, which took place in the early 80s, as the New Haven line moved from Conrail, which became a freight-only line, to Metro North, I discovered that a lot of women and people of color did not want to live in Connecticut, but they wanted to work in Connecticut. And the degree of difficulty of commuting was going to determine whether we could recruit and retain talent from New York City into Stamford, Connecticut. And we did. When I became CEO, my general counsel, both of my general counsels were women. The second of them was a Black woman. And several other executives were people of color who wanted to live in New York and work in Connecticut. Yeah. So what we did was almost, today they call it design thinking. We had an informal task force, and I presented to Metro North and Connecticut Department of Transportation. And I said, what are all the 6 or 7 things that are within our control that will get people to take the train or a bus instead of driving? And they were things that were easily fixable, like putting more police security in rail station parking lots, better announcements, better amenities in the station houses, a little bit more lighting on the platforms. And it was surprising how much bang for the better shuttle options on the destination end. It was surprising how little we had to spend to flip people from driving to taking the train.
You want to come to LA and help us out here? Because we're having a little trouble.
Yeah, I've spent enough time in LA, but I think even there, what you need to do, and my younger son lived in San Francisco, and this is an interesting example. He could not afford to live right on the bus line in San Francisco to go to work. He was paying $600 a month less to live off the bus line, but he figured out that if he used Uber Pool, he was paying with when you have 4 passengers, this was back in 2014, it cost him $5 each way each day. For 22 work days, that's $220 versus but he was saving $600 a month in rent.
Absolutely, yeah.
And instead of making 14 stops on the bus, he had made at most 3 other stops before he was dropped off. And when he worked late, he only had a 5 to 10 minute wait, whereas most bus services or rail services really cut back service after peak period.
Absolutely.
So Uber and Lyft made him able to take a public or group transportation option that actually wasn't available to Pitney Bowes people 30 years ago.
It's so funny that you're talking about this because there was an article I read not too long ago, and they were talking about what happened to public transportation in America. And one of the things that they brought up is the ridership really started to plummet, for lack of a better word, because they got rid of service. It got rid of the convenience. It started getting more expensive, and you started getting less value for your buck. So it became harder and more inconvenient to use, whether it's a metro system or a bus system. So it's very interesting that you're addressing that, because it's kind of like the history of what we did to ourselves, for lack of a better.
Yeah, and in fact, that was one of the 6 or 7 things we pointed out. We pointed out that Bridgeport to Stamford, which is about 20 miles, if somebody drove, it would be a 1-hour trip because of horrific traffic congestion. But if you could add 1 morning stop and 1 peak afternoon stop, you could cut the commuting time down to about 35 minutes.
Yeah.
And whereas the absence of that stop made it an 1.5-hour trip each way. And so that adding 1 stop at that very major rail station flipped it from being a very inconvenient option to a very convenient one. Yeah. And that's why I was saying there are a lot of little things that, because the transportation people were all thinking everybody was going into New York City. And what happened from the 1980 period on to 2000, intrastate travel and reverse commuting actually outstripped trips into New York City in terms of a potential.
Oh,
interesting.
That is very interesting. I mean, in LA, our biggest hiccup is we're not a centralized city. We are very spread out, as Joel likes to constantly tell people. We're many little cities put together, and getting our kind of hub and spoke established is challenging at best. So hopefully we'll catch up with the East Coast, because I personally love transport. Joel, you lived in DC for many years.
Right. I never owned a car till I moved to the West Coast.
Yeah. And I don't like driving. I'm a terrible driver. I fully admit that.
But I remember there was, sorry, really quick, but just to get on like the system in LA, I remember I had looked into taking the metro line, but the inconvenience of it, which is what we keep talking about here, is I would have to drive to the subway station, hope I could find a parking spot, and then have to wait for the train. It's like by the time I've done all of that, I could have already been where I needed to be.
Yeah.
So it's like, it really is, we've limited our services. So that way it kind of becomes something that it's just too inconvenient.
Yeah, you did a pooling concept where you can go online and identify origin and destination and see how many other, Uber or Lyft does that today.
Yeah.
But we did this in Pitney Bowes' mailing services center in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. We tapped a pool of Vietnamese and Cambodian workers in South Philadelphia, and we hired a bus for them to go each way each day. And great workers. There's no way they could have individually or even in small groups gotten to our facility as economically as they did on our buses.
Hmm.
But that works easier when you have people starting and finishing work at the same time. One of the issues we had to deal with was the nervous person who said, "I've got a child in school. What happens if I get the call from the school?" Well, we said, "We'll give you a guaranteed ride home," because it didn't happen that often. It was still more economical for them to take the train or the bus, but we had to say, or the carpool. But we said, "We will give you a free ride home."
Wow.
And
You're just looking out for
once a month we would have to do that for somebody, but they over worried about a low probability event. So we addressed it. We eliminated a pain point.
But that also means the employee feels valued. You know,
Yes.
to just say like, okay, you're asking me to do this, but you've got my back if I need you. That speaks volumes to people. And I feel like that has really been lacking for a long time.
Oh, yes. Most companies are not.
Had a lot of town hall meetings. That was a tradition that started in the early 1940s. If you can imagine that, gentleman named Walter Wheeler, who ran the company for 30 years. He was 4 to 5 decades ahead of his time. And he would listen to employees, and we all learned how to be on the firing line. And one of the lessons I learned, which was a life lesson for every leadership position, when I chaired a transportation task force for Governor Rell in Connecticut, 2007, 2008, I would go to an office of Connecticut DOT, because that was the charge. What was wrong with DOT? And I'd ask this question: what is it that is wrong in your life or your work life that the higher ups don't understand? And it was not something that the union brought up. Like in the rail division, the governor had put out an executive order saying no travel out of state without sign up 2 levels up. And the people in New Haven in the rail division said, "I can't take a train into Grand Central to meet with Metro North, even though we're responsible for 50% of the costs of Grand Central, without getting a 2-up sign off. That's ridiculous." And I went to the governor. He said, "Well, I was thinking about the junket to Hawaii." I said, "Well, it's written too broadly." So it was scaled back. When I went to the people in the highway division that were working on the highways, and they had a barracks in Milford, Connecticut, I said, "What's bothering you?" I thought they were going to talk about pay or benefits or overtime. They said, "Why can't they fix the leaky roof in the shower room?" It was always little stuff. And that's something I learned, that the only way you find that out is ask people. And then when you fix that, you get an outsized benefit.
Most people don't listen. They don't want it. I mean, just from my corporate world experiences, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we'll listen to you," but they won't act on it, or it'll be one ear out the other, and nothing will change. Joel, I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry.
No, I'm just saying, what a wacky concept. Ask people.
Yeah, right.
Wacky.
How dare you? And speaking of asking people and hearing feedback and having your employees back, which is kind of a rarity. I talk to a lot of people in HR and a lot of people in the corporate world, and it's a rarity. So what you are amazing for having your employees back and protecting them like that. That's huge. And you actually started your own new company called MakeUsWell Network.
Yeah.
And you're tackling healthcare and benefits and human health and well-being, and it's amazing.
That's it.
What I've done, and it took a while to get to this point, we asked the question 2 years ago. We have a company called MoveFlux, and we pivoted to the MakeUsWell Network. We said, what is it that politicians, the media, public health authorities, and other leaders are not paying attention to, that this pandemic has exposed and exploited? And today I would say 4 things. We have, number one, the CDC has said, if you have obesity or other metabolic disorders, you have a 2.6 times chance of dying if you get the virus than somebody who has no underlying health conditions. So we got to tackle the obesity crisis. And we did that very well at Pitney Bowes, but in very counterintuitive ways. The second is, how do you deal with mental health issues that are driven by what company leaders do and what happens on social media. We can't, obviously, we can provide care for people who have pre-existing behavioral health disorders or substance abuse disorders. The third is, what can we do differently in senior care? And the fourth is, how can we change our health plans to improve healthcare access? And as an example, I'm on the board of a not-for-profit called ConferMed. And what it does is, let's say I go to a primary care doctor and they look at a skin condition and they, without ConferMed or a service like it, they'd say, well, here's a dermatologist I'm going to refer you to. You try to get an appointment, it's 4 to 5 weeks away. So you go into the emergency department if you worry. Now what they do is they take a photo of the mark on your arm and they forward it to the specialist and they get a response in 24 to 48 hours. 55% of all specialist in-person visits are avoided, and it's a win-win-win. The primary care physician gets money, the patient is saved all the hassle of an in-person specialist visit, and the specialist makes a little bit of money. So that's an example, but you have to design that into your health plan. Telehealth is a way of equalizing access.
Absolutely.
Messaging for mental health applications is another way. Pop-up clinics, we did that at Pitney Bowes. We created on-site and near-site clinics. So there's a lot you can do, which, by the way, also saves on CO2 emissions, because we had in 2019, last year before COVID, we had 873 million in-person physician visits where people spent an average of 34 minutes getting to and from their each way.
Yeah.
So eliminating a lot of those has not only convenience and healthcare access benefits, but also reduces CO2 emissions.
And social justice, throw that in there. Not everybody can get to the doctor's office, can take time off work, and get, has the car to get there.
The non-emergency medical transportation is really, that system is broken.
Oh, yes.
People miss appointments because of it.
Yep.
So there are a lot of reasons why you want to figure out how to equalize access by providing more remote health or health that comes to the patient versus the patient having to go to a remote clinic.
Absolutely. I mean, how many times have we sat in the doctor's office for 2-3 hours because they're behind schedule? And I don't have that kind of time. There are times I've had to walk out of an appointment and be like, I have to be somewhere, and then I have to reschedule. So, end result for me personally, I stopped going to doctors. Not the best advice, but I don't really go anymore. So I love the fact that telemedicine is huge and that you're promoting it. And let's talk real quick, though, because this is a subject close to Joel's heart. Social media and the anxiety of that. It's damaging. It's damaging.
Yeah, my partner expertise on the MakeUsWell Network is he does a lot of analytics on social media, and he figures out what's toxic language, which are toxic sites. And that's the biggest change from when I was the CEO and then a chairman of Pitney Bowes. We were not worried we used to think of ourselves as the oasis from stress. And we said, maybe there's stress in the community, but there's this intervening factor of social media where politicians, the media, and advocates for particular causes have a vested interest in promoting conflict and stoking up conflict. So you have to figure out a way to de-stress populations. And my business partner loves the way Mark Benioff communicates with his employees and with the public at large, particularly on explosive social issues like the Texas anti-abortion law. There's a different tonality to the way he communicates and some other CEOs communicate. But it's a world today where no CEO can ignore it. If I were running Pitney Bowes today, I would have to understand what my employees bring to the workplace from the social media that they're using in their communities. And you can detect that by zip code analytics. You can actually figure out what is it that they're accessing and what are the pain points when they go on social media.
Oh, wow. That's impressive. So going to the Make Us Well Network, is this open to the public? Are people able to access you, join you? Because I want people to find you. What you're clearly a leader. You clearly have people's backs. You want to help people, and I want to make sure people find you.
Anybody who wants to go on, I have to interview them. And I'm happy to do that. We have obviously, unlike LinkedIn, when somebody joins, we don't allow anybody to do sales pitches.
Good.
We are very careful with, I don't like this content moderation, the way it's done, where people take an extreme view on one side and they basically shut out views on another. I also understand that I like the idea of editing as opposed to basically kill. You kick people off if they just can't follow the rules, but you do editing. And what we want to encourage through our networking product is dialogue, where we introduce people to one another. We have people that are very knowledgeable about regenerative agriculture, which is a way of reducing CO2 emissions, improving human health, eliminating excess water usage, and eliminating chemical waste runoff. Yes. So we've got 4 or 5 people in the network that know a lot about regenerative agriculture. My wife's she's passionate about that. She's been donating to that for 25 years. So we bring people in with a specific area of interest and we connect them with one another. And we like to do external engagements. So we will eventually have a pure passive content sign up where people can't communicate other than maybe by asking a question on a chat line, but where they aren't going to be able to network with one another. But we do want to add people to the network.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful what you're doing. And just having the engaging, and I'm fairly neutral myself. That's what I love about Joel and I. We'll have difference of opinions, but we respect each other. We both are kind of neutral. But I don't prefer having people that shut other opinions out because it doesn't agree with them.
Yeah.
You're not going to learn anything that way.
But the tricky part is, even if you have opposing viewpoints, I think that we have completely lost the conversation skill. And I think that's one thing that's been, social media has been kind of the purveyor of this, is that it really is, like you said, it's about creating arguments because that attracts more viewership. The more angry you are, the more time you're going to spend online. And I think that's the tricky part. So when it comes to our day-to-day lives, the conversations don't happen. People don't want to hear views, and a lot of times don't want to hear, or just have a dialogue saying, I believe this, I understand you believe this. So the middle ground is where we always build upon. And that's kind of what's deteriorated.
Yeah, people, by the way, social media creates fear. It traffics in fear. Fear is very unhealthy. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I retired from Pitney Bowes when I did was that there was this obsession with Sarbanes-Oxley, the SEC, and financial reporting became a compliance exercise as opposed to a way of doing a better job communicating with stakeholders. And everybody was afraid. And the fear permeated the boardroom. It permeated the executive suite. And it affects people's health. It's insidious. And one of the reasons I'm down here in Florida is I don't live in an environment of fear, of pervasive fear. And we joke about this, but it's sad when you see people, because of the pandemic, in the privacy of their automobiles as sole occupants in the automobile with masks on. There are many reasons to have masks on when you're in a crowded public place, especially if you have autoimmune disorders. And there are places I will not go down here. Like there's a sports bar that has probably the best hamburgers in town. I don't go there because I don't like to be around people that are, talking loudly, singing, shouting, even though I've had my vaccine, I've had my booster, I have high number of antibodies. But on the other hand, when I go up north and I see people in automobiles alone, that feel they need to wear masks. Clearly something's really out of whack. And
I agree with you on that.
the media, that's the media stoked fear. And I think there's a lot of confusion about where we are or are not at risk. And so CEOs and leaders generally have to lead in a way that is a healing kind of leading as opposed to a fear-stoking kind of leading.
I wholeheartedly support that. Being a geologist, environmentalist all my life, remember when mold was a big issue and everyone was talking about black mold? I saw a lot of environmental consulting firms walk into buildings in full spacesuits, scaring the hell out of people. Oh, it's toxic mold. You're going to die. Get out. Evacuate. And I'm like, you just clean it up. Get some bleach. You're not going to die. But I hated the fear mongering. And especially, I would deal with elderly people because I was on the claim side, and they would be scared to death. And I would have to calm them down. Like, listen, I'm a scientist by degree. I can help you out here. I can calm you down. You're not going to die.
Right after 9/11 was the anthrax crisis, which I ended up being the industry leader on because Pitney Bowes operated 650 mailrooms. I did 80 media interviews, and some of the questions I got is, how do you feel about going to the mailbox? And I said, the odds, and I never said there's no risk because that was that wouldn't have been credible.
Yeah.
And I didn't just say, well, we'll do the best we can. I said, yesterday we had 680 million pieces of mail delivered, and one of them had anthrax in the House of Representatives. The odds of you as an individual getting a piece of mail with anthrax on it are comparable to being eaten by a shark while you're being hit by lightning. And I also said, and by the way, if you just put aside stamped mail with questionable return addresses. If you're getting your American Express bill, you don't have to worry. If you're getting your utility bill, you don't have to worry. If you're getting a piece of stamped mail in an irregularly shaped brown envelope where you don't recognize the sender, put it aside. And, and I said, the rest of it, don't worry about it. And of course, this thing came and went in about 6 weeks. But the fear at that time was unbelievable. And I spent a lot of time on mass media, basically talking common sense to people.
Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely. So we have reached our 30-minute mark. So I wanted to thank you. We've talked about so many things, and there's so much that you've accomplished. It's remarkable. So thank you for your time. I know you're very busy, but I wanted to direct people to the Make Us Well Network. Everything you've done, your leadership and sustainability, fighting pollution is remarkable. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. And thank you for getting me on this program. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. We try our best. So on that, guys, thank you so much for your time today. We will see you next time, and have a wonderful week.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Aw.